Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. A warm welcome to you all for this episode of Avid Online Sustainability Now series. Launched in 2020, Sustainability Now was conceptualized with an aim to convert audiences into change makers and catalysts and custodians for a greener tomorrow. To date, we presented over 45 episodes in this series on sustainable arts and culture, fashion and textile, design and architecture, travel and tourism, food and agriculture, environment and wildlife, and technology and innovation. In the face of environmental degradation, especially fueled by single use raw materials, we often rely on technology and innovation to find solutions to our present challenges. But what if the answer is embracing our indigenous techniques and readapting them for our current needs? The world has woken up to India's historical sustainable practices and our philosophy of living in harmony with nature. In a globalized world today, Indian craft stands out not only for its unique Indian aesthetic, and but also with regards to being sustainable and environmentally friendly. Today, we're joined by some of the pioneers of the Indian craft space who have taken our local art forms and artisans to the world, building a global market for our craft, which is eco friendly, sustainable, and timeless. A very warm welcome to our speakers this evening, author and founder of Bandage, Archana Shah, puppeteer and founder Ishara Puppet Theatre Trust, Dadi Pudumjee, designer and founder Dehati, Niraj Dave, museum curator, co-author, The Shoemaker Stitch, Mochi Embroidery of Gujarat in the Tapi collection, Rosemary Crill, and our anchor for this evening, author and editor Sunita Nair. The speakers will share their experience of navigating the global crafts ecosystem and integrating it with our rich Indian heritage and traditions of making pottery, weaving, textiles, and so much more. Please refer to the chat box for more information on Avid Learning, our partners, and our very impressive speakers for the evening. This session will last 75 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A. Sunita will be taking questions throughout, so please keep posting them in the Q&A box. On that note, thank you once again for tuning in. Over to you, Sunita. Thank you.
Thank you, Asad. Good evening. With Western industrialization in the 19th and 20th centuries, many of our essential requirements became mass-produced commodities, manufactured in factories. Without any reverence for the power of human connection, societies moved towards mechanized goods that could serve functional needs, but were cut off from the larger culture and community. Thankfully, India survived some of this modernist onslaught, partly because our leaders wanted to preserve our indigenous arts and crafts as a symbol of our unique shared identity. These indigenous crafts are made from locally available materials and use the skills of native craftspersons. Indian crafts are disparate as weaving, pottery, and handicrafts all reflect a common Indian sensibility, respect for nature through the methods of creation and the materials used. As climate change became the most pressing international issue, the world took notice of Indian sustainable practices and the philosophy of harmonious living with nature. Our crafts industry made a global mark. Today, in a globalized world, Indian crafts stand out not only for their unique Indian identity, but are also regarded for being sustainable and environment friendly. Our practices are now often dubbed eco innovations and have been recognized all over the world. We gathered today to talk to some of the leading change makers who have made our crafts a global delight. We will discuss the global and local marketplace, the changing expectations of consumers, and of course, the relentless contribution of artisans from all over India. Rosemary, if we could start with you. You have specialized in Indian textiles and were senior curator of the Indian and Southeast Asian department of the V&A London for over 30 years. What really attracted you to ancient Indian textiles?
Hmm. Well, that's a big question. Primarily their beauty. And of course, once I started actually working with them and getting to know them close up, you come to understand much more about the amazing skills of so many different kinds that go into them. So admiration for the craftsmanship, amazement at the variety and the regional individual styles and techniques that you find all over India. And of course, at the V&A, I was very lucky to be able to work with a collection of about 10,000 pieces from South Asia. And some of them, of course, are types that you just can't see in India itself anymore, which is, sad, but perhaps inevitable. And that's the kind of thing we'll be talking about today, I think. So really, it was just, firstly, admiration for how they looked, and secondly, really getting to know them in a very close and personal way.
Did you make numerous visits to India to meet artisans, to see heirloom pieces?
Absolutely, yes, both of those things. Over 30 years, I've made, must be between 40 and 50 visits to India, usually in connection with books I've been working on. So either looking at museum historic pieces, or, as you say, going to visit contemporary makers. If, for example, I did a book on ikat, so I went all over India looking at ikat weaving, embroidery, again, looking at contemporary embroiderers as well as historic examples. So yes, I've met a lot of Indian artisans over the years.
That must have been lovely.
Fantastic, yes, wonderful opportunities.
Niraj, you did your fine arts at Hudson Valley Community College in New York, and later completed your graduation in fired materials from the Indian Institute of Crafts and Design, Jaipur, specializing in ceramics and crafts. While you were equally exposed to industrial setups and a variety of different clays and materials, you began to admire terracotta as the most beautiful material of all, and rural pottery as a dignified skill. Is this why you named your pottery studio in Kutch Dehati? Could you tell us about your fascination with terracotta and the work you do with the Kumhars in Kutch?
Sure. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for inviting me for this talk. Yes, so I would begin with, I fell in love with the material itself while I did my college from IICT. So there are so much vast possibilities in the material itself. Initially, I started with wood, metal, and stone in college, but then I shifted to clay, and I thought there are so much possibilities and so much needs to be done. And I've always, in my family, I've seen my sister working in social sector, and I was very fascinated by seeing her work with craftsmen, with farmers. So I always wanted to work in a rural environment and not an industrial environment. And also, I wanted to be in Gujarat itself. So I chose to come to Kutch. I started Dehati in 2017, and we work very closely with the potters, traditional potters of Kutch. Basically we work with three families of different villages in Kutch, and my studio is in Kukma village of Kutch district. And yes, we develop products out of terracotta, ceramic. Also, we are doing it in stoneware. We are starting to do it in with stoneware these days. Yes, so basically a love for the material, love for the technique, the skills the craftsman has, that brought me here to Kutch, where I am right now today.
How do you find artisans and potters, the Kumhars, responding to new materials like ceramics, stone, and how do you collaboratively discuss ideas with them?
So basic material of clay is plasticity, right? The basic property of the material is plasticity. So it is not that difficult to work with different varieties of clay. But yes, there are, of course, certain differences in each material. But potters are very open and very open to accept those changes and work with new materials, new techniques, new firing techniques. So they show a lot of openness to the material, different
That's
materials.
that's really good. Dadi, if we could come to you next. You studied visual communication from NID Ahmedabad, specializing in short film making, but you went on to choose puppetry as a profession, training in puppet theatre from Darpana Academy of Performing Arts in Ahmedabad. So could you tell us what really attracted you to puppetry from a mainstream art form like filmmaking?
I live in Delhi now, but originally from Pune. And puppetry started as a hobby through school and college. And I was maybe the second batch of students, undergraduate students in NID in Ahmedabad. And Ahmedabad also had the Darpana Academy and the puppet section run by the late Meher Contractor. So it became, the hobby was introduced to a more professional level and also introduced to more Indian traditional forms, because earlier it was string puppets from the UK, Pelham puppets. They were a company with string puppets, which started the hobby. And one thing led to another. Then ISRO had the satellite informational experiment, and we had a puppet studio for the Nadiad Beach transmission, and later in Stockholm at the Marionette Theatre Institute. So one thing led to another. And what's interesting is who led me on to NID was Homi and Nelly Setna, if you know who they are. Yeah. Because nobody knew about NID in 1970 all over India. And she said, yes, if you're going there, just go there. That's how it all started. Yeah.
That's fascinating. You said that you studied marionette puppetry in Stockholm, and you also did a workshop in Bunraku puppetry, the Japanese tradition. Did you find similarities between the Indian shadow puppetry and Indian puppetry traditions with these forms, international forms?
We have all the 4 techniques in India, which still exist, both in traditional groups, families, as well as in contemporary work, modern work in urban centers. And each country or each technique, the techniques can be similar through, string puppet, a rod or whatever. Bunraku has 3 people working, but eventually it's the artisan or the director or the puppeteers who make it their own. And that is special. So I think I had the good part is that it went from Darpana and then to Stockholm and then came back to India. Many people would maybe leave. And then one thing led to another. So I got into Delhi to start India's first modern puppet repertory company in Delhi, the Sri Ram Center for Art and Culture. Yeah, that's how I'm there.
Thank you. Archana.
Hi.
Hi. You've been collaborating with artisans around the country for the last 40 years to create textiles for your clothing company, Bandage. And, last week we celebrated National Handloom Day, which was instituted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi to commemorate the contribution of handloom to Swadeshi. But when you started working with the artisans and the weavers, as you've said in your latest book on sustainable craft practices, there was a deeply entrenched attitude in the minds of entrepreneurs that handloom was an obsolete sunset industry that didn't have global financial muscle. So how did you go about working with the weavers and the artisans? Were they still interested in weaving? Were they responsive to your collaborating with them?
I think when I first started, it was at NID that I was first introduced to handcrafted textiles, and I was completely fascinated by these techniques. So after I graduated, I decided that I would collaborate with artisans to create textiles for urban markets. This was in the early 80s when there were not many designers or people from urban centers who had gone to rural India to create, to work, to collaborate with artisans to create textiles for urban markets. The markets were shifting at that point of time. You see, rural people, the rural patrons of these crafts had started using mill-produced fabrics, and so it was a time in a flux. And artisans, initially were hesitant. They were not terribly sure about my interactions with them. But as time grew, they gained confidence. And well, I would say that today, more and more, if there is, through my work, one of the learnings has been that artisans I worked with for long periods of time, their children want to continue this work. There's a lot of conversation that handcrafts is no longer viable and it's too expensive. The next generation does not want to continue this work. And this is one of the reasons why I traveled around the country to find out from artisans what they want. So that one aspect of my work has been the collaboration with artisans, which really has grown. And the learning has been that if there is consistent work, artisans are more than willing to continue practicing this craft. So it's a large number. It's a second largest employment provider after agriculture. And a lot can be done for this sector. It's an eco-friendly means of production. It fulfills most of the United Nations sustainable goals. It can create vast number of jobs, empower women and marginalized communities in the sector. So it's a serious, there would be a lot of benefit in developing the sector. There's a lot of talk about developing the sector, but I think much more can be done.
Mass-produced items are often more affordable than sustainable handmade crafts. So how do you balance your commitment to handmade textiles as well as sustainability against the pressures of the market? And in this era of fast fashion, where global brands such as Zara have a wide appeal, how do you ensure that handmade textiles stay timeless?
I'd again say there are two aspects to it. It's not that handcrafted textiles can clothe the world. So we need all kinds of production. But I think what we need is ethical production. The problem with fast fashion today is the market is flooded with cheap fashion. Clothes are getting cheaper and cheaper, but who pays the cost of it? It's the people in the production line. So the wages for people is going lower and lower. So I think what one needs to start talking about is responsible consumption. And the other huge problem is the market today in India, at least, is flooded with Palum imitations of handcrafted textiles and offered at much lower prices. So there is no problem with Palum fabric. We need that. We need the handcrafted. I think here comes the thing of ethics. So there is space for the handloom to develop, and we need to do a lot more. You see, every region, it's a living tradition. Every region in this country has skills. Artisans continue to have skills to reproduce textiles that we see in museums. A lot of artisans. But you need a variety of textiles. So we are talking of almost 30 million people in this sector. It's a large sector. These skills need to be repurposed to create textiles for fashion conscious markets today. So I think it is quality over quantity. There is this whole movement of slow fashion today. And so I'm not saying one against the other. I would support ethical production and quality over quantity. And it's really the choices we make today will define or decide our future. Do you want, what happens to these vast quantum of clothing that is made in fast fashion, which is discarded? You have mountains and mountains of this waste, landfills. The third world nation is now screaming and saying, on the name of charity, please don't send us used or discarded garments. Don't use our lands as landfills. So the problem is one needs to see it in the larger context.
Which is where sustainable fabrics such as cotton and silk, help in this era of decarbonization. Do you think that small-scale karkhanas can hold their own against the mass-produced mills and factories?
Look at what's happening around the world. It is the young who are now are getting conscious of what is happening to the planet. 10, 20 years back, there were very few people who used organic food, for example. But today there's a huge movement, because what is good, people are now realizing what is good for the self and for the planet. Similarly, as there is more awareness spread about the benefits of sustainable practices, there'll be a larger audience supporting ethical production. And I think there are movements like, what happened in the Rana Plaza. The world woke up in 2013 when this building collapsed in Dhaka, which had 5 factories, and people realized, God, is this the condition in which people are working, the garment workers are working? So that led to this whole fashion revolution. Fridays for Futures. Now it's really the young who are now questioning, because they've realized that there is a real problem. There is a real problem about climate change. There is a real problem about the future of this planet. So all these things are connected. I don't think one should look at handcrafted production or sustainable practices or, in isolation. I think it's time we start looking at a more holistic picture in terms of what is it happening, where people matter, where the environment matters. Let us start talking about production practices where everyone in the supply chain benefits, and not at the cost of degradation of the environment.
Absolutely. And I think people are also realizing that sustainable fabrics are easier on the skin and more breathable.
Yes, it's to do with an awareness now, and I think as more awareness, it's just about like what brought about this whole climate change. But now it's perceivable, you can see it. So I'm sure in times to come, people will start supporting things that are good for their own skin, their own environment, and their own planet. This is our only one planet.
Yes. Rosemary, could you tell us a bit about your book on the Mochi embroiderers? And
sure.
Who was their market? Did they have a sustainable livelihood? And what really happened to them?
Sure. I've got a few pictures, if Zahabia would put one up. Lovely. Well, the book is called The Shoemaker's Stitch, and it's about the chain stitch embroidery of Gujarat, especially that of the Mochi community of Kutch. And the reason it's called the Shoemaker's Stitch is because the Mochis were originally shoemakers, and they decorated their shoes as well as sleeping mats and other leather goods with colored silk embroidery, which they embroidered on the leather using a hooked tool called an ari rather than a regular needle. Next picture, please. So they came to be known far more for their exquisite embroideries, like this detail of a gagra or skirt, than for their leather work. And their patrons were the elites of Kutch, both the ruling families of the 18th to early 20th century and rich landowning families. The embroidery is always in silk thread, always in chain stitch, which is much faster to stitch using this hook rather than the needle, because each stitch comes out of the previous one. It's looped up with the hook as you go along. So it's quite a speedy way of doing a very high quality piece of embroidery. The book is based around the Mochi Embroideries in the Tapi collection, which is a wonderful collection of textiles built up by Praful and Shilpa Shah, who's the co-author of the book with me. And many of the examples in the collection are items of costume, like the skirt we just saw, that once belonged to the ruling family of Kutch. So as well as documenting the actual pieces, the book explores the history of the Mochi community itself. And in this lovely 19th century painting from the British Library, but done by an Indian artist, we see both Mochi shoemakers and embroiderers working with the ari, the hooked tool, in the same image, which shows the crossover between the leatherwork and the embroidery. And one of the features of the book is the documentation of individual embroiderers, including women, using family research done by members of the Mochi community themselves, who have very generously shared their research with us for the book. So many of India's great artisans remain nameless that it's wonderful to be able to put names and even faces in photographs to at least some of the embroiderers. Next picture, please. So the Maharajas, the rulers of Kutch, were the main patrons of Mochi embroidery in the 18th and 19th centuries. And as well as their beautiful skirts and blouses, they also commissioned furnishings for their palaces. And one amazing survival is this row of embroidered panels in the Aina Mahal Palace in Bhuj, which we show extensively in the book, including this interior detail. And the panels show a wonderful blend of Mughal and export motifs like the flowering tree, which of course are typical of the 18th century. And each row, if you can see on the right-hand side, each row ends with an embroidered doorkeeper, which is very like some of the plaster sculptures that we see in the architecture of Bhuj. Next picture, please. Not all of the Mochi's embroidery was secular. Beautifully embroidered pitchwais like this one were made for Krishna temples and for the homes of devotees of the Pushti Marg. This is one side of a very large pitchwai which would go on either side of a doorway, showing the gopis in attendance on Krishna. He isn't shown in person in the pitchwai, but he may be symbolized by the peacock that you can see perching on top of the tree in the center. And it's surrounded by the cows that are so strongly associated with Krishna in his years as a cowherd. So embroidered hangings like this one are still made by the modern inheritors of the crafts, who mostly aren't themselves of the Mochi community, but are continuing the skills developed by them.
That's fascinating. Beautiful embroidery. So what really became of the Mochi embroiderers? Who were their patrons earlier? And did they have the same kind of patronage, after the collapse of the privy purses and after the Raj dissolved?
Well, you've put your finger on it. Of course, their main patrons were the Maharajas of Kutch and other rich families in the area. And not only with the end of that whole system did that patronage disappear, but also, things moved on and fashions change, even in these quite traditional societies. Something that's been worn for 100 years is not necessarily what the next generation wants to wear. So that level of patronage really disappeared around the beginning of the 20th century, even before the end of the privy purse. And that's why most of the Mochi community, some of them had already gone into silversmithing as a kind of extension of their work on leather work, the same kind of chasing tools they could use on silver. But most of them, as was documented in the middle of the 20th century, most of them had given up hand embroidery, and some of them had gone back to simply selling shoes. Some of the shoe shops in Bhuj, for example, are run by members of the Mochi community. So they themselves discarded embroidery as a craft, and it was only later on that it was taken up by other people who are doing amazing hook embroidery work in completely different styles. So the skill itself is still very much alive, but not within the Mochi community.
That's sad for the community of such skillful embroiderers. And there is a line of thinking that globalization does bring about homogeneity in, products. And this is one example of people wearing clothing that is, westernized, perhaps discarding traditional clothing, and livelihoods going out of sustainability.
Yeah, sure. Though, in fact, I think there was a kind of, I don't think the people who used to wear the Mochi embroideries, it wasn't discarded in favor of Western dress so much in favor of other types of Indian dress, like the sari, which perhaps would have become seen to be more suitable for a rich ruling family of Kutch. The ladies would think, oh, all the other Maharanis are wearing saris. We look terribly rural and provincial in our skirts and cholis. So I think they moved towards different types of Indian dress before Western dress became so popular. So there was a sort of intermediate stage.
That's interesting. Dadi, what about the traditional puppeteers in India? We've got different puppeteering communities in the South and in the East. And you've been working with them to help them use their art form to continue their livelihood. So could you tell us a bit about how puppetry has supported the livelihoods of these artisans, and who creates the puppets, and who uses them to perform in performances? Are they the same artisans? And traditionally, over the centuries, how did puppetry fit into our cultural imagination and heritage?
Yeah, well, there are two types of puppetry all over the world. One which you sort of divide as in traditional or generational families, and the other is the modern or contemporary work. Well, you start with some of the contemporary work of our group, Ishara. Next, we just go fast through some of this. We are working with shadows, with rod puppets, and yes, next. This was The Flowering Tree, an opera, a Kannadiga folk tale, and John Adams has created it into an opera, and puppets and actors and singers. Vishal Bharadwaj directed the piece at the Théâtre du Châtelet in Paris some years ago. Yeah. This is much of our work. Transposition is, we mix, I would say the form is maybe contemporary, the presentation, some of the stories. This comes from Betal Panchvinasati, or the Bikram Betal cycle of stories. And Thomas Mann took it from there through Schiller and created the transposed heads. And this was a performance with puppets. The archetypes were puppets, the inner voice were dancers. Yeah, next. A story that is universal, carries on and on and on, with large masks and brightly colored costumes, slapstick, based on the Emperor's New Clothes, Henderson's. Each time we perform, it's topical. Yeah. Yeah. And in this case, now we go to the traditional forms. Here it's very interesting because the shadow puppeteers from the south, you have them in Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and these, I'm not showing you right now the traditional form, but this is Chidambara Rao, who has experimented, and the elephant at the bottom was the UNIMA, the World Puppet Organization's 90th anniversary, and those clown figures were on the original logo, and so they asked him to create one. They just gave him the figures and he put them all into it, the punches and pulcinellas. Above is not a very good image, but it's the nativity. Chidambara came, a puppet theater in New York. Every year, there's the Christmas story of the three kings, and commissions a traditional form or a puppeteer all over the world. And when he saw the Andhra Pradesh Dolu Bomilata, he said, I would like to asked them, and Chidambara came up, and he said, I don't want to interfere. Let him, this is my story, and let him or let them create the puppets. Otherwise, I will tell them, do this, do that. And it's a contemporary young boy who's in jeans, and also whose name is Jesus. And the three kings by mistake go to Puerto Rico to his house, and then he asks who is they, and then the story starts. And this is his version of what we're talking about, contemporary fashion. And above is the nativity scene where he sourced a Mexican folklore picture. And from there, he took the images and put it into this frame, and is now best-selling little, piece. Every year he gets a commission. Someone asks him for that. Yeah, next. Called Mitra, the designer. This is where it's very good, where a designer or a person synergizes with a craftsperson. He works with a lot of folded metal and paper and these lamps. And this is again under shadow puppets, the skin, as you see. And it's Anjanappa is the puppeteer, and Sarthak Luthra, and the folding is done by Ankon. And I think there is a need for people who are working with design, if it's equitable, to work with the craftsperson and not overpower them, and then something comes out. Because the craftspeople are, all of them, all the young puppeteers want change. They're looking for new production work, they're looking for new techniques, and what they sometimes create or say is modern is maybe 20 years, back. And their audiences are not us. We are privileged. We're sitting in the city, and they very clearly say that, you tell us to do mineral colors and vegetable dyes and all, but you're not my audience. My audience in the interior is used to film and television, blah, 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 and they want to see bright colors, and I'm using the available commercial dyes or colors today. And those were what we were earlier using. Next. So this is one of the most famous Yakshagana puppeteers, and he's doing crazy modern work. And I asked him, what is this? He says, I have to sustain myself. For my workshops with schools, I do this, but I have my own Ramayana and Mahabharata in the thing, and I will keep doing it. I know what I have and what I have to change. But all of them need workshops. They need, exposure to other things. Yeah, next. The Odia Ravanchaya puppeteers, shadow puppeteers, they're doing new stories. Earlier, it was just the Ramayana, Chandalika and things like that, but in still around maybe the traditional art form. But if you see the original 80 years old, they were more tribal looking, and these have been slowly changing according to calendar pictures. And this has also come through the sponsorship. Who is sponsoring and how, that looks very crude, you should make it look better, and you should make it's coming to the city, so the music and the language should change and things keep transforming. So you can never have something which is just in a museum piece, it's living. And the theater form employs many people. It's not just the performer and the family, ones who make the puppets, the textile, the costumes, carving, depends. Yes, next. Here you have different variants. Maharashtra from Pinguli near Savantwadi. Something he does, up is there a Ramayan figure, and next to it is Veer Savarkar. So there is a lot of political influence there too, but they are all trying to make ends meet. And who is their audience? This is what is important. There is a nice lamp, a square lamp again at the side, and that is, if I'm not mistaken, that is that is Lokesh Shinde, Chidambara's son, and Sandeep Angaru. Sagaru Design Objects, Bangalore. So there is again a design aspect there with the leather work and bamboo frame. The big giant puppets there made by Rajasthani Kathputli figures, and they get for weddings, things like that. The question which comes about is when we as urban people question them and say, you're spoiling your tradition or you are losing your tradition. And it's the repartee is that who are you to tell us, because yes, I want to change. You are coming in an aeroplane and coming to my village. You're coming in, you're not coming in a bullock cart. You're sitting in an air-conditioned room and you tell me to be, sit in that. So it has to be a balance, and we've done a mentorship with youth of traditional puppeteers, and they wanted to use colors. And what they do is they direct, and that's where the NID thing came in, color, form. Why are we doing this? We're not making puppets. I said, we'll do this first and then go into the puppet making, the new stuff. And so that is what is needed, I suppose, more and more. Yeah.
So that's interesting that they're open to.
I will read something to you if you have something, because the whole idea of the intangible heritage thing, UNESCO, and Sharif Kaznadar, who was the main person who created this whole thing, has gone against it and has written one of the most fantastic books where it says intangible heritage in danger. Performing arts, oral expression, festive events, know-how, etc. The intangible cultural heritage reveals itself in very different fields. That's exactly what brings its richness and makes it impossible to give any rigid definition of this term. At a time when three dangers, museumification, folklorization, and commercialization are threatening it, will the UNESCO Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Heritage succeed in protecting this heritage? The man who actually created the whole idea has seen that by putting a stamp and saying, this is it, you stop the creativity, you stop, and everybody wants, and it's living because it's living, it's not in a museum. So that's where some things get lost, some things stay.
So yeah. It's wonderful that they're taking their craft form forward, and they're telling new kinds of stories on social themes, and making puppets which are which pertain to their stories. So yes, it's true that they can't keep on doing the same old thing, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, and they too need to develop their craft and take their practice forward. Do you think that they're earning a livelihood, or do they need a little more exposure, perhaps being invited internationally for performances at museums, at universities? Do they have, perhaps crop cultivation to fall back on to support themselves?
Many of them, it's seasonal work, especially in the South, where they have farms and they're farming, and then at a certain period. And right now, it's the time when the Kerala puppeteers perform. So it depends. It's the religious stuff in temples or in fairs. And then you have the folkloric, each of them, the ones that have actually gone to contemporary issues are coming from Bengal, from West Bengal, where they, in the Yatra theatre tradition, and then it comes into the puppet, where they have very interesting stories. They call them opera companies, these big, large, rod puppets, and they have things on dowry and on marriage and on gender issues. And it's interesting how from something new comes. There is a problem about the mono sort of culture, or the television comes in, because earlier you could almost see that this puppet comes from this region, or this because of its dress, the way it's painted. Today, he might use synthetic material that we're talking about. And I asked, why are you doing that? He says that if I have to be practical and I have to pack and unpack and do things, it's very difficult for me to use the other material. And you will buy that puppet as a museum piece, but when I'm performing, I can't do that. This is a problem. And he says, or she says, that I know what I am losing, but what do I do? And, my audience is very different from you.
But they still make their puppets from goat skin.
Yes, that you're only talking about the shadow puppets. Originally, it was deer skin. The gods were made from deer skin, but they can't use deer skin, so it's goat skin. But the dyes are inks and commercial, textile dyes, which are used, are brighter in color, things like that. So.
So do they largely still perform in rural communities, or are they being appreciated in cities?
Oh yes, they perform in festivals. Many of them travel abroad. It's theater and it's language based. So if something's coming from, say, the south to the north, you might know the epic, but you may not understand the nuances in the language. You'll just see the visual aspect of it, and that one thing that you see has so many other things behind it. There's a ritual, there's a way of living, there's all sorts of things, So we only sometimes see the final product, which is there, but there's so many other people who are working to make that happen. And there's so much thought behind it. Editing happens because something that is in Kerala now going on for the whole night. And even there are not many audiences watching through the night. They will only come for the scene that they want to. So when they come to the city, things are edited. There is a lot of body stuff that happens in many of the performances, and they get very scared to show that to the urban audience, thinking that, oh my God, okay. So they clip off certain parts of the puppet to make it more respectable. And this is, I remember I was speaking to you in 1978 in Bangalore. There was a huge shadow puppet gathering, puppeteers from all over the south. Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay was there, and the same question that your earlier puppets are so beautiful, muted colors and muted, beautiful dyes, this, that, and the other. So what's happened? And this puppeteer got up and said, "But ma'am, you're coming here once in that many years. You're seeing this. I know this is beautiful, but you are not my bread and butter anymore. You will call me to 1 or 2 festivals in the year, but through the year when I'm performing, and all of them have their daira, the circuits. So each of them cannot go into another area to perform in certain areas. So then, and they even sell that if somebody dies. So they go and they get a lot of, they earn through kind as well. When they go in the villages, it's grain, it's things that still happens, and Thanksgiving, harvest, all these sort of things. So it's there.
And does the state government commission them?
Yes,
to perform on social themes and pay them?
To an extent, yes. The Sangeet Natak Academy, or the central one, the main one, has festivals, and but they're all asking for a platform where workshops happen, where they're introduced to new techniques, they're introduced. He says, if I'm using new materials, I need to also know how to use that, in a better way, because otherwise you'll criticize me and you show up it and now I'm using styrofoam or thermocol. But what is the, so during COVID, I must say that most of the traditional puppeteers made fabulous little clips on their cell phones. They made little videos which they circulated, and they could have been better used by our government, I would say. State governments, of course, used them because they were very good, and some of them did get financial support, but otherwise much of it was voluntary, and they did it because it was good work. And the creativity was really good.
So in your workshops with them, do you help them contemporize and, work with different styles?
When we do a workshop, I don't help them to contemporize. I ask them what they need and what do they want, because the traditional puppeteer is very good at copying. A Rajasthani puppeteer, Puran Bhatt, will make something fantastic and the next 10 will make it, but without thinking why he made it. And so that is sometimes a fear. These giant puppets, Ishara started some time ago during the Commonwealth Youth Games, and it happened in Pune. We're still using. And now many of the traditional Rajasthani puppeteers in Delhi are making this in their style. But there are certain things that they could do better if they're using that. So that is where I think we come in, to help. And I must say that many of the younger the youth of these generational puppeteers have got the talent. They are now in villages working in banks and schools. They do help their parents, grandparents, but they want to make stories on Buddha, Jesus Christ, on all sorts of things, and why not? But that's the fear that the the umbrella sometimes then comes in, the one who is financing or sponsoring, or the grant givers get upset saying that you're spoiling your tradition. This is where
they have to grapple with these pulls in different directions.
Yes, and that is a problem. Yeah.
So they sing along with their performance in their language. Is there any translations, or it's just?
Well, it depends. No, it's their language. I mean, every performer has their language. You can give a synopsis or something, but yeah. I mean.
So Dadi, did you get your Padma Shri in 2011 for working with them and for helping them?
I don't know what I got it for. I got it for, but they said it's for your work in puppetry. So yeah.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Thank you. Niraj, if I can ask you, you worked with these kumhars who were making pots for functional use over the years. So what really were they making their pots for in Kutch?
Yes, so traditionally, there was a potter, like single potter, at least one potter in in every village, traditionally before, in olden times. And they used to make all the functional vessels, products, pots for rituals, pots for architectural pots, then cooking, storing, even the clothes. I'm talking about specifically about Kutch. Even they used to store their clothes in pots. So there were about 80 to 85 different shapes and forms which were made traditionally, and all of them had different purposes, different uses. And the buyers and their clients were the village itself, where they lived. So all the communities in the villages, they used to buy vessels. They used to get. Actually, there was a barter system before, and all the maldaris or pastoral communities, in return, they used to give them goat, cow, dairy products. So it was barter system going on before. And also the painting, the USP and the speciality of Kutch pottery is the painting which is done on the surface of it. They use the natural color, black, white, and red. So lady potters from the family, they does the painting work. And all the communities that they serve to had their own choices of painting. Like Rabari community preferred black more on the pots. So they used to paint all the whole pot with black color, just black color. They didn't use any white on it. So it was specifically for each community. Yes, so they served the village and the communities.
That's so fascinating. So are they still in their same villages? Do they still get commissions? Are they making pots for different uses now?
Yes. So majorly, many of the potters have moved from villages to small towns like Bhuj, Anjar. They have left their villages. So now the work has drastically changed now. Now they make pots for the local buyers, which they make for the festivals like Navratri, Diwali. They make pots for them. And there are a couple of villages like Lodai and Khauda. They still make pots for the village people there, but it is very less now. They have shifted to more commercial products like planters. They are making piggy banks. They are making diyas. They are making tawas. So things like that. Yes.
So in your work with these potters, You know, do you guide them in how to make their pottery perhaps less functional and more as an art form, and perhaps to look
Uh,
at a wider audience?
Actually, I myself personally believe that there is vast scope for terracotta, and terracotta as a material is very functionally strong. There are a lot of functional attached to the material, but again, the market, the people are still like they have forgotten the material. That's what I feel, or the benefits of the material. They have forgotten that. But yes, through the with the demands of the market, the present market, uh, we discuss like with potters. I also learn many things from them. It's always an exchange. So I always encourage them to not leave their local traditional whatever they are making for festivals or etc, anything. So I never encourage them to leave that work completely and work on new things. But yes, simultaneously, with their local markets, we try to work on new techniques. How can we amalgamate or combine different techniques, different materials, like you saw in the presentation. We did the raku technique, which is from Japan. We did it on the traditional forms of Kutch, so which altogether gave a new identity to the same beautiful shape. That, but it doesn't have a function. It is for home decor purpose. Yeah.
You were saying that the entire family has to be involved in puppetry, in pottery, because there is so much of work involved. So could you tell us about, do the children like it? Do they want to continue
Uh,
doing it?
so each and every family member in the Potter family has their specific roles, and 70% of the work in this craft is done by the lady, by the woman, from preparing the clay uh, to finishing the product, to painting the product, and finally the firing also done by the women. So until and unless whole family is not involved in this craft, even the kids, even the small, even the elderly people, because now you have Google. Before there was no Google, so whenever there is a problem like in firing or making any stuff, they go to the elderly person and they had that experience to share. So, and after doing everything, who goes to sell it? So even one member of the family who can go in the van or any vehicle to go to sell to the different villages, that will be really helpful for the potter. So I think until and unless the whole family is involved in this craft, it's very difficult for a single potter to survive and continue this craft.
Do they face competition from any kind of factory-made pottery?
Yes, yes. These days it is rising a lot, especially with terracotta. Like Morbi, which is the ceramic hub of India, is very nearby to Kutch, and they are largely producing ceramic tiles. But now some of those industrialists are now shifting to terracotta products, which potters used to make by hand. The handis, the tawas. Uh, Now they are making it in machine and they are firing it in big kilns and they are producing in large numbers, and which they are producing it for very cheap price. So this is the very big problem which potters are facing right now, uh, because it looks the same. uh, Even normal buyer will not understand the difference because it's more surface is more smooth, it's more beautiful, the firing is even, so people prefer to buy the industrial product compared to the handmade one by the potter.
And you were saying that the handmade one is a bit stronger and it lasts much longer than the machine made one?
Yes, because of the techniques with which it is made. Like in Kutch, there is a technique called ghadai, which is a tapping technique. A certain portion of a pot is thrown on a wheel, a potter's wheel, and then the rest 50% is tapped with a wooden bat and a stone. So with that technique, it adds to the property of the clay. It increases the porosity of the clay. So which is not possible if you make it through the industrial process. So it is always very good to buy a handmade, because though people won't get the same finish every time, because you can't have two same products if it is handmade, especially for pottery, because it is fired in wooden kilns, and the temperatures are not circulated evenly in the kiln, so you can't get the same color every time. But yes, the properties and everything is much better when it is handmade.
That's so fascinating. And it's interesting that that is really the USP of handmade, isn't it?
Yes, yes,
Archana,
yes, definitely.
um, may I ask you, Archana, you were saying in your book that, adding a little machine to a loom perhaps will make it faster, but the inherent beauty of a handmade textile piece is going to be lost. Could you tell us a bit about, the advantage of handmade on a hand loom?
In any handcrafted product or hand loom, each piece is different. Now the machine we already have, the market is flooded with a uniform kind of production. What the handcrafted offers is the diversity, the variety, the
Yes.
textile quality.
Yes.
So I think there is, as I said, there is a market for both. So why mix the two? What's
Yes.
the point of putting a machine, and how does that help? You lose out on that inherent quality
Yes.
of the handloom fabric, in which case you might as well use the machine-made fabric, no? So the USP of a handcrafted product is the weaver manipulates the design, the pattern as he goes along. So there is a uniqueness to the product. And
Absolutely.
in a country like India, where each and every region of the country offers you different techniques and different skills and different natural fibers, why not utilize this diversity and build on it?
Absolutely.
So
So,
so the difference is between that whole unified mono look, and the feel of texture, which is different.
yes. And the artisan gets much more satisfaction out of using a hand loom, without a machine, without a
Forget
spindle.
the wheel. It's so in terms of that, yes, for sure. But also he's his own master. And the artisan works in the comfort of his own home, is his own master, he or she, and if can earn a decent livelihood out of it, why would an artisan living in rural India migrate for economic reasons to urban centers where jobs are really now difficult to find?
Yes, absolutely.
And living conditions can be very brutal. So I think what is really required is we need new patrons. You see, earlier, all along, crafts and arts have always been supported by patrons.
Yes.
We need is this new patron. If there is
Yes.
a market, artisans will continue producing.
Absolutely.
And this whole collaboration with design, with it is just that they are able to add newness to a product because the markets have changed. You see, earlier the artisan knew the audience, understood his audience. Now it's an alien audience, but the skills are there and they're remarkable skills. So how do we repurpose vast number of remarkable skills to create textiles to suit markets today.
Yes,
it's a
he's
doable thing without huge investment. And
yes,
also build an economy which is a bottom up development. I think
yes,
it would be so meaningful to do this.
yes. I mean, he's sitting in the village. He's got the skills, but he does need the designer, who's
Not
familiar.
necessarily a designer as we understand as a thing, because a lot of artisans are now traveling out. It's to do with an exposure. Yeah. So I would say a lot of artisans today, I would say they're designers, they have seen interactions, like a lot
Yes.
of young artisans that I know, who it's like the second or the third generation already. And they've seen designers coming, interacting with and staying with their family, working there. So they've now started traveling. A lot of them are creating their own products. So there is this. And I think that they are fantastic designers. They know their technique.
Absolutely.
And, so it depends on how enterprising the person is.
Yes.
So a designer needn't be an alien urban person.
Yes, the weavers are traveling.
With creativity, trying to add. You see, in the traditional markets were also very different. There was more of the
Yes.
same. Now fashion conscious markets need something new on things move very quickly. But I mean, my own experience, I've been working with just the bandhani technique now for 40 years. And somehow, and it's not like we've changed the technique, it's still retained, it's working within the parameters of what the technique allows. So what do? You play around with color, you play around with, it's still the dot, the bandhani,
Yes.
so a little change in the pattern, a little change in the color, a little change in the what you do with that fabric. 40 years means more than 100 collections with the same technique. So it's very, very doable. My experience of working with many, many crafts, I feel, it's over time. It's tested over time that you can. And I do believe that if I'm working in an area, I believe in working within the parameters of what a particular craft skill offers. You don't need to change it because you need to do something else. You can move to another area. We have such a vast wealth.
Absolutely.
Of skills, around the country. It's really time. It would be wonderful if a lot of these skills can be used, can be repurposed for times. Today, it just is so relevant. This means the production seems more and more relevant today than it ever was.
Yes.
And actually,
yes.
what Gandhi talked about, there was a relevance then, but if you put it in context today, it is as relevant, if not more.
Yes. So
both the aesthetic part of it and the livelihood part. And now, of course, it addresses issues of climate change because it's an eco-friendly means of production with a very low carbon footprint. So it addresses many issues.
Yes. Yes, that's very true. And by working alongside them, you've helped them create pieces that today's market would love to buy. And do you agree that many fashion designers today are using hand woven? And
it's a great opportunity for Indian designers because nowhere else in the world can you create specialized fabrics in small production. So actually, it is the benefit of the designer in India today. They are really lucky to be able to have access to these remarkable skills for small production. Most designers in the world would have, you cannot design fabric because everything is large scale,
yes.
But handlooms allows you very small range. Hand
Yes.
production. I don't mean just handlooms because there's so many other elements to it, where there's a block printing and there's a bandhani, but it all allows small production, which means you can experiment a lot. So it's a great opportunity actually for our Indian designers.
Yes.
So it's an equal thing. I really think it's a collaboration. It's an equal thing. There's a learning gain on both sides.
That's great. That's wonderful for them. And do you think that those who weave saris, are they still finding that kind of appreciation for, the sari. I mean, you've got a different weaving tradition, like you showed in your map, in every region of India. So is the market appreciating saris, and do they like to buy them, if not to wear every day, at least to wear for weddings and festivals? Do the weavers struggle with selling saris?
There is definitely a market for saris. I wouldn't say necessarily a growing market. People are not wearing saris on a regular basis, but still for festivities, for special occasions, for weddings, they are wearing saris. But the weaver is very willing to adapt. So the same weaver who weaves sari, you can restructure, you change the reed, make small changes in your loom to be able to weave fabric, to be able to weave dupattas, to be able to wear stoles. So it's not, that's not difficult to do.
Yes.
So the same weaver the structure of a sari is different than, say, the fabric that needs to be stitched. But that's something that the weaver understands very well and is able to do.
Adapt, and that's good for him.
Adapt. It's not a difficult thing to do. And a lot of the ideas or the motives or inspiration comes from our traditional saris, but you adapt that to create
fabric material.
Fabric material, or say a dupatta, which is very, because many more people are wearing that. So I think you need to address what the market also, the kind of product that the market requires.
Yes.
And that's very possible. It's a very doable thing.
Archana, do you use sustainable packaging material, such as, tree gum to stick a piece of fabric with paper? Have you started using sustainable packaging material instead of chemical adhesives? Or is that something that
don't necessarily need to? I mean, people carry shopping bags and they are they've always been in
so you put it in there.
I encourage people to not take a bag, because even that to me is, whether you need it, why use something that you're going to go home and throw if you're going to use it again and again in a paper bag? So to my mind is how can we be less wasteful in every possible way within our own production. Also, how do we cut garments so that it's not, what do you do with the waste chindis that we have? How do you, I think sustainability
reuse them
about just being more productive, in the sense more be less wasteful. So sometimes we get into these tokenism in terms of, we are using this.
Yes.
Less in the handcrafted stores. Just use less of packaging material, because most of it is thrown.
Yes.
Need to use that only when you need. You can use something that
absolutely,
that is a material which is more sustainable, or more, it's the making of it does not damage the environment. But so I really think it's to do with that. In every touch point in our production, we try and see, is this the right thing to do? Are we being less wasteful?
For you, has the internet helped you market these artisans products around the world or in different cities during the lockdown? Were you able to keep the business, the sales and the revenue coming in for artisans through the internet?
Well, minuscule, because I think the COVID really changed things around, and artisans just lost all the orders they had. People lost those orders because there was so much uncertainty. People were sitting at home, not going out. They realized they could live in their pajamas. They didn't need to buy anything new. So things changed, and that is the reality. Now, to say that and people say, everybody was busy buying. They were buying on the internet food, but they were not buying necessarily a new sari, because where do you wear that sari? Nobody was going out.
Yes.
So it did change things, and that is the reality.
So do you...
What was interesting is that I saw a lot of young artisans made these little groups, and I was quite amazed how they were able to reach customers and do direct sales. You see, individuals, the production of a lot of these special products is small. A weaver weaves, say, 4 saris. If it's an ikat sari, or 5 saris, or the production is not massive. So
Yes.
they need to sell just that much. It's easier to sell 5 products against 500
Yes.
that a retail store needs to sell every month, right?
Yes.
So, all the internet was used in a very interesting way by young designers, but all that is still a drop in the ocean, because you see, you need a market.
Yes.
There were a lot of, and they say, some people, because to support artisans, what are we talking? It was such a small percentage.
Yes.
This is a really, really large sector. 60% of India lives in rural India. A large part of it falls into, apart from agriculture, are artisans, even people who are agriculturists, do, because it's agriculture is also seasonal. So the rest of the time they might be doing something else, which could be called artisanal production.
Yes.
So while a large number of people.
Yeah. So while the internet is there for them to, be their own agents, perhaps try and sell, for entrepreneurs to sell their products, the important thing is to, get a larger customer base and
just spread awareness about the value of handcrafted production, and
yes.
then that would be, then you will build a larger audience for this.
Yes.
Of course, I must also say that the internet artisans are learning to learn new skills. I know a dyer who said, this ombre, everybody is wanting this kind of thing, but didn't know how to do it. And then suddenly they discovered, YouTube can teach them. So, of course,
that
people
is
are learning
useful.
new things, upgrading their skills, improving, and that's always happened. So it's a good thing that, so, and artisans are very quick to learn. You see, they need to sell their product. It's their livelihood. It's their way of, so they are very, very willing to adapt to newer situations, learn new things. The internet allows them to browse and see what is it that people are wearing, what is it that people are liking. Can we make products that would suit this kind of market? So there is a lot of that kind of experimentation going on. So all that is true.
That's wonderful.
And that is very encouraging.
Yes, it's helped them a lot. Rosemary, if I can ask you, sitting in London, what would you say is the perception of the international community towards Indian craft and handmade clothing or handicrafts? How do they see Indian craft? And do you think that the internet has helped create a body of knowledge for them, to create awareness about Indian craft?
Well, that's a big subject. Well, I mean, of course, in Britain, we've always had a massive respect, love, desire for Indian textiles in particular. So, there's no question that everyone in Britain is hugely aware of Indian textiles and has always loved them. So that's never been a problem, if you like. Obviously, as we've been talking, things change, markets change, and there have been peaks and troughs. Like, in the 80s, everybody was wearing ikat or tie-dye or whatever. But I think Indian textiles have entered a phase of extreme sophistication in many respects, and I'm talking about handmade things. So that really hasn't changed. I think there's always been a slight, the only reservation people have had about Indian material is the question of quality control. That, we're sitting here, I mean, this has been going on since the East India Company was trading, in the 1600s, that can we be sure that if we order something from India, it's going to be well made? And so that, that's something that's always going to be there, whatever country you trade with. But in general, yes, people have a huge affection and admiration for Indian textiles and other crafts, but I think particularly textiles here in Britain. And as far as the internet goes, yes, obviously, it's been a massive tool for disseminating information, not so much trading in things, but I think people have been looking at Instagram, looking at YouTube videos, all this kind of thing. And so there's a massively increased awareness of all the different types of things that are being made in India. And places like MAP in Bangalore, or the Sutra organization, Dakshina Chitra, they're all putting out wonderful information on all this kind of material. So I think it's been a very advantageous tool in getting people to know more about the whole sphere.
That's wonderful. So thank you. And I think we're past our time, and we need to open our discussion for Q&A from the audience. There's an interesting question here. While there are markets for crafts, textiles, and pottery, is that also the case for leather crafts, such as shoes, chappals, and bags, particularly with more sustainable tanning practices, such as vegetable tanning? Who would like to take that?
I don't think any of us is a leather specialist, but as my mochis started off as leather workers, I can only say that I've certainly seen a lot of leather products around, both in India and internationally, and they seem to be being made to a high standard. As to the sustainability, I don't know about what materials they're using, but it seems to be a growing area in competition with Italy, I'd say, for export markets.
Yes. There's a question for Dadi. How does a beginner go about learning the art of puppetry in today's physical digital age?
As Archana mentioned, that the artisans are quite ingenious in using new techniques. I found that we have 7 or 8 states with, if it again going into the traditional work of puppetry, Rajasthan, Odisha, Bengal, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh. Now, I found that from middle to the south, the artisans were far more in puppetry, at least, were far more ingenious in using the net and using their phones in making sites and contacting people compared to, I would say, some of the Rajasthani puppeteers. I don't know why. Or Bengal, yes, but overall in the south, it was much better. There is the Pullavars from Kerala who do the Tolpava Putu, shadow puppet tradition.
Yes.
One of the family young boys, Shajish, he has now, we managed actually, writing is that he is going to the University of Connecticut in the puppetry department, and he's going to get a master's in puppetry there. He comes from a traditional family doing his work. He now, some time ago, used robotics on his shadow puppets. And we were all wondering, why are you doing this? Because what happens to the puppeteers? He said, no, this is being put at airports and in museums, or, you know, where there is a Kerala folk art thing and these puppets were moving. He collaborated with a technical person, and okay, it's a bit mechanical, it's not human, but he said it's just for exhibition purposes, but he did it, you know.
That's fascinating.
And that is, none of our modern puppeteers have done that, you know, so-called. And this is someone who's there, and now he's going there, and hopefully he'll come back and see what happens, you know.
That's fascinating.
So
that's wonderful.
It's each person to themselves, you know, how, if you give a person an opportunity and if you show something, there's no end to it.
What's the name of the artist who did folded lamps?
Yeah, no, it's not. Yeah, that is not Shajish.
That is Lokesh. Lokesh.
The folded lamp was Anjanappa.
Anjanappa.
Yeah, Shajish's pictures were not here as Kerala shadow puppets. And he took the traditional Tolpa Putu tradition, and they were fixed onto a base, and they had these little motors, and they were sort of moving, and all of us puppeteers all over the world got a little worried that why are you doing this, because you're mechanizing your own thing, and your old family members will not be there. He said, no, what the human being can do is not what this machine or this motor will do. This is just to create an interest. And so I'm putting it goes into some exhibition hall or some places like that, or when they come to the airport in whichever city in Kerala, they've got all these Kathakalis and things like that, and there is these moving figures, and so it just creates an interest. And whether we might say that it's spoiling, but that's his sustainability.
Yes, and he's got a valid reason. You can't have the artist behind the puppet at the airport night and day. So that's great that he's tech savvy. Can we not introduce these skills in school curriculum?
Absolutely.
So that these skills don't die.
Some states do, but more is needed. I think there are other countries who do much better. Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries do far better than us. I think our state governments and our academies have to be pushed to do this, go into schools. They do workshops in schools, they work with leather, but it's always tracing. They have a figure and the kids put the leather and trace, but still it creates an interest. And all of our puppeteers, including myself, our work, our income doesn't necessarily come from performances. It comes more from workshops. There are workshops for teachers, there are workshops for schools, there are workshops for all sorts of things, health issues, and that's where it keeps us going sometimes.
Thanks, Dadi. There's a very quick question for Rosemary. With her immense experience of museums, there is a much bandied term, contemporize. What does it mean, in your view, to authentically contemporize a traditional craft or art?
I have to admit it's not a term I've ever come across, but I presume it means to bring something up to date by using traditional techniques, but more contemporary or modern subject matter, maybe incorporating contemporary events into, for example, a Bengali Chitraka scroll, something like that. So a combination of authentic or traditional techniques with more contemporary subject matter or themes. Dadi's trying to say something.
And the last question for Archana. What were the factors that kept the new generation from the family craft?
There is very little value in general for handcrafted or anything to do with hands. And today artisans are earning less than their unskilled laborers working at construction sites. So if there is regular work, if there is regular income, artisans would be very willing to continue this practice. So it's all to do with, if there is a market for them. Market, if there's a robust, but a regular market.
Yes.
And they need to have a regular income. That would encourage artisans to continue practicing their craft. To expect them to hold on to a tradition because we think it is beautiful or a heritage, it doesn't work. It has to, they need, all along, artisans, for them, it's a profession. They need to earn a livelihood out of, and a regular, the confidence. If a younger, almost all the children of the artisans I have worked with, out of choice, are continuing this work because they have seen a financial transformation in their lives.
Yes,
they appreciate the comfort of being their own masters, working from their own home at their own time, and earning a decent livelihood.
Yes,
a regular income, because there is sustained work. So very clearly, if there is work, artisans will continue practicing their craft.
Yes, I think all of us agree that what they really need is work and appreciation and a market. So thank you very much, Asad.
Thank you to our panel, to Rosemary, to Archana, Dadi, Niraj, and of course to you, Sunita. I mean, for being part of this panel, but also being such a champion to the artisans and, actually championing their skill and craft forward. I know the last 2 years has been detrimental to everybody, especially to the artisans. And, for us to be moving forward and you all guys to be keeping their craft alive in what you do is so important. A big thank you to actually this. I was telling the panel this earlier. This panel actually came together because of the book Rosemary came about, her new book brought about by Niyogi, and Trisha actually introduced us to it. And I have so many books on Rosemary on my bookshelf, so I'm like quite happy to be part of
How
the
nice.
discussion. But no, honestly, congratulations to you all. What we're going to do from an Avid perspective is at the end of this, you'll get a thank you email with all the links to all their books. So in case y'all don't have it on your bookshelves, which are must reads, you have a chance to just buy them on Amazon or wherever it's available. But thank you once again for being here, and thank you to our audiences for tuning in such numbers. I know our lives have gone on to the old normal, and we have many, many things to do. But the good part is y'all are here, or y'all are seeing this at another time at your convenience. Do stay in touch. Follow us at Avid Learning. Our hashtag is Learning Never Stops. Until we meet again, stay safe and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sunita, once again. Pleasure. Good night.